Welcome to The How of Business with your host, Neri Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to this episode of The How of Business. This is Neri Lopez, and my guest today is Neri Karra Sillaman. Neri, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. This is a conversation today with Neri, who is an author, an advisor, an entrepreneur. I'll tell you more about her in a moment, but her remarkable journey from a child refugee to internationally recognized business thinker is what we're going to explore, especially the research and that went behind it, and her new book. The new book is titled Pioneers: 8 Principles of Business Longevity from Immigrant Entrepreneurs. So I'm excited to talk about this. There's 8 principles that are covered in this book. Obviously, we're just going to touch on a couple of them. Business principles of business longevity and how us as small business owners can apply them to help build our companies and the companies that last. And that's the big focus. You can learn more about the How of Business resources, including the show notes page for this episode, and learn more about my one-on-one and group coaching programs at thehowofbusiness.com. Also, I invite you to consider joining our business community, the How of Business community, on Patreon, and subscribe wherever you might be listening to this episode so you don't miss any new episodes. So let me tell you a little bit more about Neri. Neri Karra Sillaman is an author, advisor, and an entrepreneur whose work focuses on business longevity, as I said, but not just that, innovation and the impact that those businesses can have. She's the author of Pioneers: 8 Principles of Business Longevity from Immigrant Entrepreneurs, which has been recognized as one of the top 10 best new management books in 2025. As a founder of her luxury leather goods brand, a B Corp certified zero waste company established more than 25 years ago, she combines hands-on entrepreneurial experience with research-driven insight. Neri is an entrepreneurship expert at the University of Oxford and holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge. And as I mentioned, as a child refugee, she draws on her journey of personal resilience and adoption to advise leaders on purpose, culture, and long-term success. She's joining me today, and she lives outside of Paris, France. So once again, Neri, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Henry. It's a pleasure to be here.
Same. And we were chatting before we started recording. Neri actually got your bachelor's at University of Miami. Is that right?
I did.
So we were chatting about that. As for many of you know, if you've been listening, I grew up in South Florida, so she knows the area well. But we're going to focus on the book. But before we get there, obviously very interested and got to hear at least at a high level some of the highlights of your personal journey. So take us back and just walk us through those early days, your childhood and the experiences there, please.
Sure. I was born into a Turkish minority in Bulgaria. And during communism, the communist government in Bulgaria decided to carry out an ethnic assimilation process against Turkish minorities, and that meant changing our names forcibly from Turkish to Bulgarian names. It lasted several years, basically my entire childhood.
Wow.
In June of 1989, Todor Zhivkov, who was running the country at the time, he came on TV and said that we need to leave the country, and you can only take with you what you can carry. And in our case, it was 2 suitcases.
Wow.
So we took 2 suitcases. One day, very unexpectedly, I was 11 years old, and it was not an easy journey at all, because I explained this recently to a Bulgarian friend of mine, because she also was confused why some people couldn't just leave, because you will not be given papers. For example, my mom was born in Greece, in Thessaloniki, so she wasn't considered a Turkish ethnic minority, funnily enough. So we had some challenges getting her a passport, but my father bribed her, and we had help from his police officer friend who drove us as close to the border as possible, and we were able to cross the border. And I remember my mom not wanting to go because obviously she didn't want to leave her family behind. She didn't want to leave our home behind. Right. You leave everyone behind.
Everything, yeah. And where did you end up then, and when you left?
We ended up in a refugee camp, which was set up by Red Cross at the border. And we didn't have any money. eventually my father started because he had an aunt. I'm sure you come from this culture as well, where it's not your blood relative necessarily, but you call her an auntie.
Right.
So he tried, we had this, the yellow pages equivalent of that. We knew her name, so he will search for her name and call everyone who was on that with the same last name. And
Wow.
eventually he finds her and she says, yes, come.
Because you had to be, I guess the term I thought is sponsored, right? To be able to go somewhere. Somebody had to provide you. What was it that person did for you, that your auntie did for you?
That she opened her door to her home to us.
You
We were
actually
in a
physically
refugee.
needed a place to live. You had no
Yes,
resources and no place to live.
zero money. Absolutely zero money. And she opened her home to us. And in order for us to get to Turkey, to get to Istanbul, where she lived,
I see.
a truck drivers who were passing, it's a big border, it's the main border, who were carrying goods will take families and bring them to wherever they wanted to go, just out of the goodness of their heart.
Wow.
And we got on top of this truck. And today my parents drive between Bulgaria and Turkey. It takes about 5 hours or less door to door to drive. It took us days. I remember that on top of this truck. You can't stop. There are other families on that truck with us, on top of that truck. And eventually we made it to her home. And she had opened her home to several different families like us, who are not blood related necessarily to her, but
Right.
we are still, we are one big family.
Yeah.
And yes, that's basically my early days.
Wow. What did your father do for a living before?
He worked in construction.
So was he a laborer, or was he, what type of position did he have?
He worked everything, laborer. He doesn't have a degree. He has a degree in Bulgaria. It's called this specialist degree, but it's not. It's a very basic. And in Bulgaria, he built homes that were affected by the earthquake. So he's not an engineer. He's not an architect. He doesn't have that type of qualification,
Yeah.
but he can build you a home.
Yeah. So then what did he do for a living once you all got started to get established in Turkey? What did he do for a living?
Very good question. He tried, because we still were waiting for our papers. We only have a refugee. It's a piece of paper that's given to you. And it's very hard to find jobs. First of all, the language, we quickly discovered that the language that we speak at home, we are considered Turks, but we are really not. We are not like the local Turkish people. So he found different jobs. He found a job in construction. Eventually, he started to work at Mercedes-Benz as a laborer. My mother worked in a textile factory as a factory cleaner, different jobs. And my dad worked as an illegal cab driver. I remember that as well. Any jobs they could find, anything in order to make a living, in order for us to be able to get out of my auntie's home and rent our own place. And we eventually did that. We ended up living in one of the very, very low income areas in Istanbul, very low income. We rented a home where we didn't have any heating, any electricity, any water. We had to go to the municipality in order to get water. And I started school with 83 students in one classroom.
Wow. This is Neri Lopez, briefly pausing this episode to invite you to schedule a free coaching consultation with me. I welcome the opportunity to chat with you about your business plans and offer the guidance and accountability that we all need to achieve success. As an experienced small business owner myself, I understand the challenges you're experiencing, and often it's about helping you ask the right questions to help you make progress towards achieving your goals. Whether it's getting started with your first business or growing and maybe exiting your existing small business, I can help you get there. To find out more about my business coaching services and to schedule your free coaching consultation, please visit thehowofbusiness.com. Take that next step today towards finally realizing your business ownership dreams. I look forward to speaking with you soon. Obviously, this is an extreme example, but this is the immigrant story that has been played out throughout history. And my parents and grandparents, similarly, although not as harsh of a condition, but similarly, Castro took over, took all the possessions, and they had to flee and leave everything behind. And so therein, similarly, as you observe with your parents, I am assuming, is that spark of being creative and doing anything and everything to make some money, right? To make a living, to put food on the table, to have some level of shelter. And whether, even for me and my family, people who might have had degrees or whatever, that didn't translate, it didn't transfer. And so they had to be manual laborers. But it's that desire, obviously fueled for survivability, to do whatever, that I think is part of what maybe drives an entrepreneur with your background.
Absolutely. So this is called in the literature necessity entrepreneurship, because you are spot on. Your degrees are not recognized. You have to put food on the table, and you will do anything and everything. And that what I've seen will drive those immigrants into, tap into the resources that they have in order to create anything
Yeah,
out of nothing.
exactly.
And it's many examples of that in the world, in the academic literature. And in a way, that is, that's how we started our business as well. My father started selling leather products and making commission out of them. He will
I
sell
see.
jeans, he will sell t-shirts. It's no longer in business now, but it was called Penye Lux, and it's a big company at the time. They used to do these, they would produce for really well-known, make their t-shirts, etc., for Nike, for Adidas.
I see.
But then if those t-shirts had some sort of defect, they will be sold to the public.
Mm.
When I say to the public, in bulk,
Yeah.
but you really need to know. And my father will go there with my mom and choose t-shirts, choose clothing in order to sell them
Wow.
in Turkey and make money out of it. This is the foundation of our business. That's
Yeah.
how my parents started to sell leather products, make commission out of them. We are talking maybe about 4 years after we immigrated. It's all timing. But I'm not going to, in the book, I talk about luck. I'm not going to say luck in the sense that we know how. You have to be able to read the time. You have to have awareness what is happening. At the time Berlin Wall fell down.
Mm.
So all the Russian people, former people who lived in former communist countries, started to come to Turkey. This is written in the literature, and I don't want to offend anyone, but local business people at the time didn't necessarily understand what was happening.
I see.
And they will try to, well, maybe it will sound harsh, but in some ways take advantage.
Sure.
And think short term,
Mm.
not think long term, and try to maximize their profits immediately.
Right.
Instead, we did the opposite.
Mm.
This was my idea at the time. We put up a sign outside of our tiny
You
little
were
store.
involved in the business at that point, yeah.
Yes, my brother, everyone.
How old were you
Everyone.
then? Now, what are we talking now? What age were you at this point?
14, 15.
Wow.
But I was the only one who spoke English in
I
my
see.
family.
I see.
And I said, let's have a slogan for the brand, even though it's not our brand. And let's put up a sign outside in English, but also in Romanian, in Russian, in Ukrainian, in all the former Soviet Republic languages,
Right.
and say, please come in for a homeland cup of coffee.
Huh.
And looking back to it, this was a genius idea, because a lot of the time, later in my research, I talk about this, and in the book I talk about it, because you signal to someone, I am like you. The intention here is, just come in. And honestly, Henry, when they came in, we didn't mix the two.
Interesting. It was genuine hospitality. That was
Genuine.
genuine. Yes.
Genuine. This is the key. This is
Mm.
the key. In fact, recently with a friend of mine, I was thinking we should write an HBR article about this, because you can't mix business and pleasure in this way. You
I see.
have to, if you invite someone for a cup of coffee, it has to be a cup of coffee.
I see. And now that I have to think in particular, you tell me if I'm wrong, you've lived in the States, you're married to an American, you've studied here. Is that even more so in your cultures, or do you think that's just a human thing that applies worldwide?
It's a lot in my culture. The friend that we discussed this with is also Turkish. And I think, however, it's something that we can all learn.
Yeah, I think it's universal because if you look at businesses that try to that pretend to be hospitable, right? That but really it's just a marketing ploy versus the businesses that genuinely care about the customer experience. We're talking here, primarily, I guess, B2C, but it could also apply to B2B. When you're genuine, people can read that, even if it is, we don't have all time for a cup of coffee, but people can sense, the consumers are smart enough to sense when it's genuine and when it's not, is what I find.
You are spot on, absolutely. And I think it's like this in any interaction. And it's very
Mm,
important to have genuineness because you lose trust.
yeah.
If I say to you, let's do X, but then it ends up, I really want to do A, you are going to diminish the trust of the
Yeah.
other person.
Because then what you're doing is you're manipulating the customer or
Yes,
the client, right? And you
yes.
figured that out early. And of course, watching your dad, you figured out that to sell something, you have to have that level of trust. And from that comes that genuine connection that then allows you to provide value. Yes?
Absolutely. And it's something I talk about in my book about forging connections based on identity and authenticity.
I see.
In my thesis, this is called, in the academic literature, it's called homophilic ties, where birds of a feather, I hope I don't mess it up, but flock together.
Yes.
So that's saying basically, but you have to finding your own tribe,
Yes.
and you don't necessarily, this is the key here. What I've seen in my research is that you don't necessarily have to come from the same culture, country, background, but you have the ability to create your own family, to create your own tribe. And you can use strategic storytelling. For example, you can find commonality. And I say in the book, we have a lot more in common. What unites us is much bigger than what divides us. We can all find that commonality. And I think this is the key as well. And it can really help a business, especially small business owners. In the early days, when you are starting a business, your biggest resource is not necessarily going to be capital or money, but it's going to be people who you surround yourself with. It will be your suppliers, your distributors, your customers, and how you relate to them, how you build those connections is going to be a key.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Okay, I want to go back for a moment to your journey. Then
Sure.
you have those early experiences, impactful experiences, obviously, with immigrating, but then with the business and being involved at a very early age. Did you decide then that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or were you not clear at that at age 14 or 15? Was it just about survival, or did you know this is what I want to do?
No, it was just about survival in the
Okay.
sense I didn't. It's very interesting, you know, the way you phrased it, because and it made me think about it actually, because in those early days I started to take my father, the owners of the Turkish brand, to trade fairs in Italy. We even came to Germany, we came to
Mm,
UK to Filofax because it was one of their customers. From the age of 15 until the age of 18, I was traveling with my father,
wow.
but really starting to have an understanding of how the leather products industry worked, and I
Mm.
saw it firsthand. Then I went to University of Miami to do my business degree. And I only went to University of Miami because I failed to get into the Turkish university
Oh, interesting.
and I wanted to be out of Turkey. That's the
Mm.
truth. I wanted to study in US and I wanted to do that as quickly as possible. So when my rejection came end of August, I basically had an acceptance from several universities in UK, University of Miami, and Boston College. But Boston
Interesting.
College said, you can come in January of 1996. You need to come in September of 1996. And I said, I can't wait 1 year. That's too much.
That's too long. Absolutely.
That's too
Plus
much.
it's cold up there. So you had
Yes.
that as well. What did your mom and dad think about you going all the way to America to study?
They didn't like it. This was a surprise to them. I took the SAT without telling them, TOEFL exam without telling them. I went and applied to all these universities. There is an office in Turkey it's an organization. It's a private business really, but a woman who worked there helped me to figure out how the whole process worked, what I
Really?
needed to put together. And I went to my dad first and I said, here, I am accepted into the honors program, which is all true, by the way. But also, they knew I was someone very serious. I think I was very driven and ambitious. And it was in University of Miami that I had the business idea.
Yeah.
Because as part of the honors program, I had to write, either I had to do an internship and write a report about it, but I didn't choose that. What I did was basically write a business plan
Business plan, yeah.
for Neri Karra.
Is that right? Okay, so question for you. You come to university to study business. You had already been part of a business. I'll have two questions. What did you figure out and find out that you already knew about business that either you can't learn or they were trying to teach you? In other words, what did you already know that was clear to you? This is what they're not teaching us that is clear about what it takes to be successful in business. Was there anything that stood out? Do you understand? Am I asking it correctly? Yeah.
Yes, I was 18, 19 at the time. So I wouldn't say I was thinking that analytically.
Okay.
But I
But
was an
instinctively,
immigrant.
you knew a lot about business already that, you weren't going to, that people getting a 4-year degree weren't going to have because you had really been out there doing it, selling, promoting, adjusting, pivoting, all of that. You had been doing that with your parents.
I didn't think about it that way. I was
Interesting.
only 18, 19, and I was very young. However, what I was thinking, and this has a lot to do with self-esteem, feeling, I would say. And as an immigrant, when I came to University of Miami, I am an 18-year-old. I really lived this time the immigration felt very different because I looked at my classmates around me. I
Right.
felt they all have it figured out. They drove very expensive cars. I didn't
Exactly.
realize it at the time, but it is one of the most expensive universities.
It's a very
Um,
expensive, small private university.
yes, and it was very intimidating. So as a result, what I did was just study.
You
It was
just,
one
yeah.
thing I can control. But my book opens up with this at the computer lab of University of Miami. And I was recently in May giving a talk to the students at
Wow.
University of Miami. I took a picture of that computer lab.
Is that right?
I discovered that Andrew Grove is the founding CEO, one of the founders of Intel.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a refugee. He's an immigrant.
Yeah, he wrote a
And
wonderful book about it. That's what I was
yes,
it's a great
it's
book.
right behind me. It's an
Yeah.
amazing book. And I started to read about him. It gave me a lot of confidence. And then finding out about all the other businesses in US, amazing, very strong, very powerful businesses, first of all, were created by immigrants, and they used to be small businesses at some point.
And so that begins to give you confidence that, wait a second,
Yes,
I can do that too, right? You must have thought in your little bubble, well, there's only so much we can do. We're immigrants. We're doing it out of necessity and survival. But then I think your eyes were open to, wait a second, others can do this. Others have done
yes.
this. I'm going to continue to do this.
It gave me confidence because until that time we were selling and making commission, very little commission. My parents
Mhm.
were out of the leather products we were selling. We didn't have our own brand. And for me, it was and learning in business how it all works. Just Henry, when we were doing it, it wasn't, you are in the field doing it, but in terms of putting it pen to paper, structure, that's what business school gave me
That's what it gave you. Yeah.
to really understand.
And it opened up your mind to the possibilities, yes,
Exactly,
that you may
exactly,
not have ever explored or thought about until you had
exactly.
that opportunity to step back to learn and see others and how it's done. And that really gave you this vision for the business that you created the
It did.
business plan.
It did. For example, what is resources? What is capabilities? What is a sustainable competitive advantage? And I used to teach much more regularly than I am now, but sometimes I say that to my students too. You may think this is just theory, and you probably think this is sounding really boring to me, but it does work. And I wouldn't dismiss the theory or the business knowledge completely.
I see what you're saying. Do you so for those reasons, obviously the university experience was critical to you. And looking back at it, you're glad you did it that way.
Of
to go
course.
get a formal education. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay, let's come to the book again. The book, again, the title is Pioneers, 8 Principles of Business Longevity from Immigrant Entrepreneurs. So the question I always ask about books is, why did you write the book? And ideally, in your mind, who is it for? So why did you write this book?
I wrote the book because of the statistics. Close to 50% of Fortune 500 companies are started by immigrants. Immigrant-founded businesses last longer than those that are founded by their counterparts. And close to 80% of billion-dollar startups have a founder or an executive, top executive, who is an immigrant. Despite that, when we look at the business literature, when we look at the literature, all we see examined is this: why are immigrants more likely to start businesses? Which we all know why. But nobody seems to make the connection between business longevity and immigrants. But that's what numbers are showing us. And that's not only in US, that's the case in Asia, that's the case in UK. And I am also, as you know, an immigrant entrepreneur. It was very personal to me. I really wanted to write the book and I wrote it very fast. However, it's 2 decades of my research, because I started researching ethnic entrepreneurship, international entrepreneurship during my PhD at Cambridge. And then I didn't really go further into it
Interesting.
because I was in and out of academia in some sense. I was running a business with my family. And then when I saw these statistics, I just couldn't wait. I had to write it.
Who ideally do you want to read this?
Entrepreneurs, and they don't have to come from an immigrant background, of course. I think sometimes, I hope, of course, I use immigrants as an example, and that's who I researched. But the lessons here are for anyone who runs a business, who wants to grow their business, who has an existing business and who wants to start a business.
Yeah. So share with me, if you would, Neri, in just a few words, summarize. Obviously, we got to read the book to get all the detail, and we're going to explore some of the 8 principles. But at a high level, Neri, what is it? Why is it that these businesses last longer?
Because there are several, I summarize it in terms of 8 principles.
Mm-hmm.
They are able to use their past. The business idea, we often ask, where does the business idea come from? But in my research, what I've observed is that it's very much connected to their past. So the past is not something to be ashamed of or discarded. You use it in order to start a business. And that's what I very much observed. You become a bridge across cultures. Even people back in your home country can be an asset to you. Your experiences in the past can be an asset to you. Then when you start to build a business, you rely, in my book, I talk about it as a fry in your own oil. You use the most of your resources. That can be your community, your friends, your family, what you have. The immigrant-founded businesses also, of course, they make profit, but they are not simply driven by profit. They want to solve a problem. They are driven by creating shared value for distributors, for suppliers, for their customers. There is not this let me make a quick buck type of mentality. There is not this thinking of, I want to grow as fast as possible. That's why there is, today sustainability has become this very popular term. Immigrant-founded businesses are a perfect example of sustainability, because sustainability doesn't mean only the products that you use, where you source your material.
Right.
So they also have a very high threshold when it comes to rejection, failure.
Exactly.
They are highly resilient. They don't seem to, the word almost like no is a good thing.
Absolutely.
No is when the beginning of business happens. No is the beginning of negotiation.
When you have no choice. When you were first and your parents were first immigrated, no wasn't an option, because no meant no food on the table, right? So there is no. We got to keep going until we find a yes. And so, as you said, that's one of the principles: reframing rejection. I'm assuming that's in part what you're talking about, is bringing that lesson that we learned. We, to a big extent, especially when that's fresh, when we have to tap back into it, we're not afraid of the fear of rejection. Rejection is a given. It's a matter of how we process that and whether that stops us or not. Is that right?
Absolutely. There's also another thing, Henry. There's a lot of it is very much connected to innovation. Of course, you have very limited resources.
Exactly.
You know, you have to. Nubara Fayan, who features in my book, he's the founder of Moderna, also says innovation, immigration. No, how does he say? Innovation is like immigration because you travel from one thing to another place in your mind. And for example, in his own companies, they very much apply the principle of creating something from the future back. You start with the end in mind. So again, this is something that applies in my own life as well. Having a very clear vision, it doesn't mean that is not going to change because you have to have flexibility. The end goal is there. You want to make this business a success. You want to keep going. But if a supplier said no to you, or if a distributor said no to you, it doesn't mean you give up. It means you have to, there will be another option.
Right. You have to find another option.
Exactly.
And it's such a critical point. And, I talk about this often on the show that for most of us as very small business owners in the United States, we start with limited resources. And that's a challenge, but it can also be turned into an advantage. In other words, if I had unlimited funds, I might make decisions that are based on, well, I'll just throw money at the problem. And that isn't necessarily the best solution. When we are tight on resources, monetary resources specifically, I'm talking about here now, I am forced to be creative. I am forced to be resourceful. And then I love the point you made about, though, tapping into those human resources that we have developed or that we develop. I think that's critical. Here's where I'm not following correctly, though, that I want to come back to, Neri, and that's that generate profits the right way. Because what I didn't understand is you said we're not looking to make a quick buck, but I don't know, is that true? I mean, when I'm an immigrant, like your parents were, it was about immediately putting money on the table. So what am I misunderstanding there?
It's about creating value. So it doesn't mean you're not going to make money. It doesn't mean you are not willing to, but it's about creating value for the other person, solving a problem.
And why is that so much? Why does that seem to be so much more important? I think you're arguing, or very important for an immigrant founder. Why? Where does that come from?
Because you want longevity. At the end of the day, you want the business to last longer and be profitable for much longer instead of, I guess, by making a quick buck, I do not want the entrepreneurs to think in this way, where I will give you an example. I had a student who said to me, I'm ordering these things from Alibaba and I can sell them 10 times the profit. But how long will that last?
Exactly. I see. I understand what you're saying.
That was the point.
And it's similar to the story you gave of what you did with the shirts, with the T-shirts, where instead of taking advantage of that blip in the market with all those Russian immigrants, you were thinking longer term.
Exactly. And for example, when my father started to sell in those markets, did you know there were no stores? No stores, because it was right after communism. There were no physical stores. There were no leather products in the market. So when he first got his own distributor, his requirement was, I want you to open a store and sell my products in a store, in a physical branded store. And I will come help you build that store. I will provide you with the fittings. And he did that because his background is in construction. He did that himself with my brother. And again, we were kids, but when you are building a business as an immigrant, everyone gets involved.
Yeah.
So basically, he could have easily said, let me just take the commission out of these leather products. It's not even my own brand. And why even put requirements? Let them sell it in street markets. I just care about my own commission. But this way, when we started our own brand, he had built a very strong distribution network. That's the difference between making a quick buck. It doesn't mean you don't care about profitability, but you have a much longer view of things.
Yeah, understood. So we've touched on it, but besides teaching and writing the book, what is the business that you're in now?
My family business is run by my family at the moment. As you know, I live outside of France. I started my consultancy firm. I give public talks. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm an advisor to businesses, to investors, and I write books.
And they run the business still in Turkey. They still live
Yes,
in
they
Turkey.
do.
Yeah.
They do.
All right. So what have we not touched on? What have I not asked you about yet, especially from your book, that you think is a key lesson for small business owners that are either starting or planning to start a small business?
I think the very last principle is about luck. And that came almost as, as the title suggests, serendipitously in some sense, because when I was interviewing them and during the coding of my interviews, I noticed that every single one of them, without me prompting, talked about luck. Every single one of them. So they said, I was lucky I met my business partner. I was lucky I met my wife. I was lucky I failed in that business because it created Calendly. I got to create Calendly. So every single one of them. However, when I went back and asked my questions in more depth,
Right.
it turns out luck is not an event for them. It's not something that happens outside of them, but it's a resource. It's a capability that they get to use. They use it in a very strategic way. So they do make themselves lucky by taking a chance.
Exactly.
I called it dare to play your own hand.
I love that. And that's exactly the way that I've come to see it in my experience personally and in coaching hundreds of clients now and studying business, not to your level, but similar to you. I do find that luck plays a component. I think that sometimes humble entrepreneurs might overplay that,
Mhm.
but as you're expressing in that particular principle, the way I always say it is you have to get in the way of luck. If you don't put yourself
Yes,
out there in the field of play, then it won't come to you, right? And we're talking
exactly.
about a different type of luck. I'm not talking about the luck that I get a lottery ticket and I win. That's luck. It's things you put yourself out there and then things happen that we call luck, but it's because you put yourself there and you were in a position to capitalize in that opportunity.
Spot on. You said it beautifully.
Thank you. Yeah, but it is a key component, and I think we need that. On the other side of it, though, I hear people something. Well, I'm just not a lucky person. Woe is me. And so the flip side of that is people have to say, okay, maybe I was unlucky. Maybe for example, we opened a business, a co-working space, shared office space business in the heart of COVID. We had no choice. We had been under construction. Now, was that unlucky? Well, I don't know, maybe. But all I could do was we had to persevere, right? We had to figure it out. We had to navigate that and figure out how to get out on the other side. And it also has to be that it doesn't destroy you. And going back to the immigrant philosophy, mentality, experience is, well, I have no choice but to keep moving forward.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing all of those ideas. Again, all these 8 principles are spelled out in the book, and it's a great book. Again, the title is Pioneers: 8 Principles of Business Longevity from Immigrant Entrepreneurs. We'll wrap it up with this question. What's one thing, and it might be again what we just shared, but what's one thing that comes to mind that you want us to take away from this conversation, Neri?
I think we touched on a lot of points. To keep going, I know entrepreneurship is it's not for the faint-hearted, as they say. You need to have courage and you need to keep going despite the challenges because you never know what's around the corner and dare to play your hand. Put yourself in the way of luck, as you beautifully said it. I think I would, as an advice, that's what I would give because there were many times when I also thought to myself, not even in the family business we created, but even in my own business, where I thought, should I just even keep doing this?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But then something will happen. But it's because I keep producing, I keep being curious. And be curious. That's also another thing. Be curious. Try to uh, read or be interested in other different things that are not necessarily in your industry. And the first principle, build a bridge across cultures, because you may be able to bridge 2 unrelated things together in your own business and come up with a business idea that is not necessarily out there yet. So be curious and keep going.
Love that. I love that. This point about intellectual curiosity is such a key one. But again, I understand the correlation you make to as immigrants. it's almost initially it's a defense mechanism, right? You're figuring out this new land and how do I protect myself and what are the dangers that I need to look for. When we haven't had that experience, we tend to be very comfortable in our bubble, our family bubble, our neighborhood bubble, our community bubble. And it's only sometimes when we go outside of that, either because we're forced to through immigration
Mm-hmm.
or because we travel or move or whatever and put ourselves in those environments, that's when I think it can spark that curiosity. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Persistence is critical, although I want to come back to that in a moment. And then the courage to fight through, to move forward, even in the face of fear and uncertainty, to fight through. Yes.
Completely.
Quick question though on perseverance, because this is something that I know you've studied and I'd like to get your thoughts on. The thing that's a challenge sometimes for entrepreneurs is we have to have that blind desire, passion. This is the thing we're going to do. We're going to make this leather goods business work. How did you determine, though, at some point, or how do you help business owners determine, you know what? I appreciate your perseverance, but you're banging your head against a wall. You need to pivot. How
Very
do you
good.
help people determine when it's time to pivot?
A very good question. I think I have experienced that several times in my life. Most recently, it was with the book, the book that we are talking about right now. Actually, for almost 2 years, it was rejected, but the proposal was about resilience. It was not about immigrant entrepreneurs and business longevity. I had an idea to write a book about resilience. However, as I said, it was rejected by almost every single publisher, agent, anyone you can think of. And at some point, after you've exhausted every single avenue that the red light is flashing, you have to say, what is it that I'm not seeing? And that's when you pivot in our business as well. For example, we had in around 2008, as you know, the financial crisis hits. As a business owner, you know there is a problem in the
Right.
business. And that's when you will find this interesting. I put my business professor cap on and it helps me because I ask myself the question, okay, we have a problem here. What is it? How can we pivot? How can we save the business? And that's when we started to produce for leading luxury labels because our sustainable competitive advantage, if I can put it in business terms,
Yeah,
is our manufacturing, our
I see.
craftsmanship that is unmatched. So it wasn't our sustainable competitive advantage is not the same as the Louis Vuittons of the world where they have not endless, but very high amount of money to spend on marketing and celebrity endorsements and influencer campaigns. However, we have the manufacturing.
Right. So you knew you could fall back on that, but repackage, reframe how you went to market.
Not how we went to market. It's more about our own business, how we are able to continue with this ship going. You have to keep this ship
But
going.
instead of if I understood you correctly,
Yeah.
instead of necessarily manufacturing for your brand, you became a manufacturer for other brands. Is that what I understood?
In the sense, yes, instead of putting all of our efforts into the branding and selling our own brand
I see.
and producing our own brand, we now expanded our resources to manufacture for other brands.
Yeah. And with the book, when you hit that wall, finally, you reframed it, the messaging, and
Yes.
now you found a market with it with this new framing
Yes.
of the message. Yeah.
And it was immediate. The very first publisher I showed it to, it was an immediate yes.
Because like anything else that we're bringing to market, the market tells us, yes, there's a place for this right now or not, right? And that's
Completely.
what you did as an entrepreneur. You could have said, again, that I think the takeaway for me is you could have said, let's put nobody wants this book. Instead, you forgot, wait a second, what does the market, I know I have value here. How do I frame it such that the market will buy this and get the value from it?
And being open. I wasn't
Open to that. In other words, you weren't so
open.
married and especially with something you write, which you have a
Yeah.
pride of authorship, understandably, you were open enough to repackaging it, reframing it, maybe even doing some rewriting. I don't know.
Well, it's a completely different book. And the original book on resilience turned out to be, I published it as 6, 7 different Fast Company articles.
I see.
So I still wrote about it, but it was a very different thing. So
Excellent.
be curious. I think that's another thing. Be open-minded, be curious, not just to the market, but listen to yourself. I think with entrepreneurs, if there is one advice I can give, is to quiet your mind. And you can do that by going on a walk. I'm not necessarily saying meditating, but quiet your mind and really try to hear yourself, your heart, in some sense, if I can say it in this way, because that's where the gold is.
Love that.
And
Love
it's
that.
not so much outside in the market. And in my book, I have a very good example. If we have time, Reem Hassani she's the founder with her brother of Numity. She told me entrepreneurs tend to look outside of themselves for answers or how to start a business or what type of business to start. But they need to look within themselves first and then start a business. And she said, our business could have been anything. I could have been an artist, but it still would have looked exactly like the company does today.
I see.
And that's the case in my own story as well, by the way. The book didn't come because I looked out into the market. It came because I finally was able to embrace who I was. I am an immigrant entrepreneur.
This is your voice. This is
Yes.
your view through your unique lens of this topic.
Yes.
Tell us where you want us to go online to learn more about you. And of course, the book is everywhere, Amazon or wherever, but tell us where you want us to go if we want to learn more about you.
You can follow me on LinkedIn, Neri Karra Sillaman, and I have an Instagram page, prof.neri, and my website, nerispeaks.com.
Excellent. I'll have links to that on the show notes page as well, in case you're not where you can write that down. Neri, thank you so much for spending the time with me today and sharing this inspiring and delightful and educational and story and all of these insights. Thanks for being with me today.
Thank you, Henry. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. This is Henry Lopez, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again is Neri Salamon. I release new episodes every Monday morning, and you can find them anywhere you listen to podcasts, including the How of Business YouTube channel and at my website, thehowofbusiness.com. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.